Welcome to the channel.
I'd never thought I'd be here writing about this. Feeling like I've been hit by a truck emotionally, like my world's come crashing down after 25 years of marriage. But here we are. It started with small things. My wife Amy, who's always been loving and sweet, suddenly seemed different. I noticed it after a few weeks, maybe more. Our intimate life, which had been kind of steady but not too exciting, suddenly seemed better. I mean better. More passionate, more spontaneous, more present. At first I thought it was just a phase. Maybe she was just in a good mood, maybe we were reconnecting. We hadn't been on a real date in years, but she'd suggested a weekend getaway, which felt nice. But then came the other signs. The phone she was glued to, texting late at night, leaving it face down. She's never been secretive, so it made me wonder. I couldn't shake it off. Was I paranoid? I couldn't keep ignoring it, so I decided to ask her about it casually, you know? I figured she'd just laugh it off, tell me I was being silly and we'd move on. So I said, "You've been different lately. Anything going on?" She was standing at the kitchen counter and I swear she froze. She turned around and gave me this look, like a defensive, sharp, annoyed kind of look. She then laughed a little too quickly and said, "Nope, just life, you know? Things are good, you're just being weird." I could tell she was lying. I didn't press it, but my stomach twisted. There was something she was hiding and I knew it. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I felt it. That's when the doubts really started to creep in. Something wasn't right and I couldn't let it go. That the days dragged on. The more I thought about it, the worse it got. I could feel my gut screaming at me, there's something going on. So I decided to take a chance and confront her. But not head on, not yet. I mean, what was I supposed to say? "Hey, I think you're cheating on me." That would sound insane. So I had to be strategic about it. One evening after we'd had dinner and she was cleaning up, I casually said, "You've been so different lately. Like, I don't know, just more energetic or something. Is everything okay?" I tried to sound chill, but inside my heart was pounding. Amy dropped the dish she was holding, just a glass, so no big deal, but she flinched like I'd hit her. It was subtle, but it didn't go unnoticed. She quickly recovered and shrugged it off. "Oh, I don't know. Just getting older, I guess. You know how it is." I could tell she was trying to play it cool, but I wasn't buying it anymore. I pushed a little further. "You know, I've noticed you're always on your phone lately. You never used to be so attached to it. And the late-night messages, it's kind of strange." She turned to face me, her eyes narrowing. "What are you trying to say, Chris? You think I'm up to something?" Her tone was sharp, defensive. I let out a small, nervous laugh, trying to keep the tension from escalating. "I'm not accusing you of anything, Amy. I've got a bad feeling, that's all. I mean, who are you texting all the time, anyway? You never tell me." Her face went white. She snapped back, her voice rising. "Why does it matter, huh? You don't need to know everything. I'm entitled to my own privacy." The moment those words left her lips, I felt a coldness settle in my chest. Something was definitely wrong. This wasn't like her at all. Amy was usually open with me about everything, even the small stuff. But now it was like a wall had gone up. She took a deep breath, clearly trying to calm herself, and turned her back to me, muttering, "This is ridiculous, Chris. I don't want to fight. Can you just let it go?" But I couldn't let it go. Not anymore. My mind was racing, and before I could stop myself, I blurted out, "I hired a private investigator. I'm going to find out the truth, Amy. Tomorrow. You can't hide it from me anymore." I immediately regretted saying it. Her shoulders tensed, and for a second she froze. The tension in the air was so thick I thought I might choke on it. She whipped around, her eyes wide with shock and anger. "You what? You hired someone? Are you serious? That's how little you trust me." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my emotions in check, but I couldn't stop my voice from shaking. "I just want the truth. I need the truth, Amy." The silence that followed was unbearable. I didn't care if it destroyed everything, I needed answers. But seeing her in that moment, so defensive and furious, made me realize just how deep the wound had already cut. She wasn't even trying to defend herself anymore. After what felt like an eternity, she spat out, "Fine, do what you have to do. But don't expect me to explain myself to you again." With that, she stormed out of the room, leaving me standing there, heart in my throat, wondering if I'd just shattered the last piece of our relationship. The next day, I was set to meet with the investigator. My stomach churned at the thought of what I might find out. But honestly, I needed to know. I had to. The uncertainty was eating me alive. Amy had no idea what was coming. And neither did I. The next morning, I couldn't focus. I was set to meet with the investigator later, and I felt like I was losing my mind. Amy was distant all morning, barely acknowledging me. Her kiss goodbye was quick, cold, nothing like what I'd been used to. It hit me, she was already pulling away. Finally, I met with the investigator. I could barely breathe as he laid out everything. Hotel bookings, intimate texts, phone calls that went on for hours. It was clear, she'd been seeing someone else for months. My stomach twisted as I flipped through the evidence. It wasn't just one mistake. It was a betrayal. The investigator asked if I wanted more proof, but I already had enough. I just wanted to leave, to get away from it all. As I walked out of the cafe, the weight of the truth hit me. My world was shattered, and Amy had no idea I knew. The hardest part was still to come. Confronting her that night, I couldn't bring myself to sit down with Amy right away. The truth was burning inside me, but I had no idea how to begin. I needed to confront her, but everything felt like a blur. When she got home, I was already there, sitting in the living room, waiting. I could hear her footsteps as she came in, and the second she saw me, she froze. "Chris, what's going on? Why are you sitting in the dark?" she asked, her voice tense. I stood up and looked her in the eye. "I know everything, Amy. I know about him. The dinners, the hotel rooms, the late-night texts. I know what you've been doing." Her face went pale. She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. I could see her scrambling for an excuse, a lie, anything to cover it up. But there was nothing. "I hired a private investigator," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. "I know everything, Amy. You can't lie your way out of this anymore." She took a step back, her face flushed with a mix of shock and anger. "You hired someone to spy on me?" she snapped. "You really think I would do that to you?" "I don't think it, Amy." "I know it," I replied, the words cutting through the tension. "For months you've been lying to me. Sneaking around behind my back. And now I know the truth." She looked at me like I'd slapped her, but I didn't care anymore. I wasn't going to sit here pretending everything was fine when I knew she'd been tearing me apart. "You want to know why I'm doing this?" I asked, my voice rising. "Because I loved you. I trusted you. And you betrayed me. That's why." She stood there, silent, tears welling up in her eyes. But I didn't care about her tears anymore. Not after everything she'd done. "I don't even know who you are anymore," I whispered, the anger fading into heartbreak. The silence stretched on, suffocating. I had said what needed to be said, but it didn't feel like enough. There was no coming back from this. I didn't know how or even if I could go on from here. But I knew one thing for sure, everything had changed. The silence hung between us like a heavy fog. Amy didn't say anything for what felt like hours. She just stood there, her eyes red, lips trembling, like she was searching for something to say but couldn't find the words. Finally she spoke, her voice shaky. "I didn't mean for it to happen, Chris. I swear." I shook my head, unable to even look at her. "You didn't mean for it to happen? That's the excuse you're going with?" Amy's eyes welled up and she took a step toward me. "It wasn't like that," she pleaded. I just got confused. It's not what you think." I let out a bitter laugh. "Confused? You've been sleeping with someone else for months, Amy. Don't even try to tell me this was some accident." She stepped back, her hands shaking. "It wasn't about you. It was about me, about what I was missing. I wasn't getting the attention I needed. He made me feel wanted again." She paused, biting her lip as if she were trying to hold back a confession. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So, you cheat on me because he gave you attention? Is that what you're telling me? Her face crumbled and she started to cry. I never meant to hurt you, Chris. I was stupid. I thought I could handle it. But I can't. I'm so sorry. I looked at her, but I couldn't find the sympathy I used to have. It was gone. Sorry doesn't fix this. You betrayed me, Amy. You destroyed everything we had. Her voice cracked. I know. I'm so sorry. I can't take it back. I know I messed up. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. But no matter how hard I tried, the rage and heartbreak wouldn't let up. I don't know if I can forgive you, Amy. I don't even know if I want to. She stepped closer, her hand reaching out like she was going to touch me, but I pulled away. Don't, I said, my voice low. I can't look at you right now. I need space. I need time. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand. I never wanted to hurt you, Chris. I don't know what to do anymore. I didn't respond. What was there to say? I wasn't sure how we got here, but I knew we weren't going back. Not after this. I turned and walked out of the room, feeling the weight of it all pressing on me. The house that once felt like home now felt like a prison. I didn't know where to go from here, but I sure as hell wasn't staying in this place with her anymore, and the next few days were a blur. I stayed in the spare room, away from Amy, away from everything that reminded me of what I had lost. I couldn't bring myself to look at her, and I couldn't face the reality of what had happened. It felt like I was living in a fog. Everything felt distant and unreal, as if I was watching my life from the outside. Amy tried to talk to me a few times, but I couldn't find it in myself to hear her out. Every word she said just sounded like another lie, another excuse. She apologized over and over, begging for forgiveness, but I couldn't get past the hurt. I didn't want to hear it. I couldn't trust anything she said anymore. I spent hours just sitting in that room, replaying the conversation in my head, thinking about how everything had changed. I kept asking myself how I didn't see it. How long had this been going on? How could she have looked me in the eye for all those months, pretending everything was fine, while secretly seeing someone else? The betrayal ran deeper than I could have ever imagined. The worst part was how cold I felt. I used to love this woman with everything I had, and now I felt nothing but anger and disappointment. She had taken something pure and twisted it. She had taken me for granted. I didn't know what I was supposed to do now. Part of me wanted to just walk away, leave the house and never look back. But another part of me couldn't let go of the years we had spent together, the good times, the life we had built. Still, I knew deep down that things would never be the same. She wasn't the woman I married anymore. And I wasn't the man who trusted her completely. We were strangers now, and I wasn't sure if there was any way to bridge that gap. Amy gave me space. She kept her distance, but I could see the guilt eating her up whenever I looked at her. But it wasn't enough. Guilt didn't fix anything. It didn't undo the damage. And I didn't know if I could ever get past it. I just wanted it to end. I wanted the pain to stop. But I knew it wasn't going to be that easy. The hardest part was yet to come, the decision of whether or not to keep fighting for this relationship or to walk away for good. A week passed and it only got harder. Every day felt like an endless cycle of waiting for something to change, but nothing did. Amy was still there, still apologizing, still trying to make things right, but I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. The woman I once knew seemed to have disappeared, replaced by someone who had shattered everything we had built together. I tried to keep my distance, but it wasn't enough. I was constantly on edge, just waiting for the next bombshell to drop. Every time she came near me, I felt like I was suffocating. Her presence felt like a reminder of everything I had lost. I couldn't handle it. One night, after another round of her begging for forgiveness, I snapped. I couldn't do it anymore. I was done pretending. I couldn't keep living like this, caught between anger, heartbreak, and confusion. Amy, I said, my voice low and shaking. I can't keep doing this. I don't know how to forgive you. I don't know if I even want to try. She looked at me, her face filled with fear. Chris, please, I'm so sorry. I'll do anything. Please don't leave me. The desperation in her voice should have been enough to make me reconsider, but it didn't. I had already checked out. It's too late for that, I said, my voice breaking despite myself. You broke me, Amy. And I don't know if I can ever put myself back together after this. Her face crumpled as she stepped back, but I couldn't let myself care. I couldn't stay in this toxic cycle of lies and regret. I needed space, I needed time to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do with my life now. I think it's time we go our separate ways, I whispered, my heart aching even as I said it. Amy stood there in silence, her tears falling, but I couldn't be the one to comfort her anymore. The man who loved her had disappeared the moment she betrayed me. That night, I packed a few things and left the house. It felt like I was walking away from my entire life, but it was the only way I could breathe again. I didn't know what came next, but for the first time in a long time I didn't care. All I wanted was peace, away from her, away from the lies and away from the pain. I didn't know if I would ever heal from this, but I was damn sure going to try. It's strange how quiet everything gets when you leave. I had never realized how much noise I had been living with, whether it was Amy's voice, the tension, the lies. But now that I was alone, everything was different. I found a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, just a basic place with a few rooms and a lot of silence. It wasn't home, not by a long shot, but it was mine. It gave me space to think, to breathe, to figure out how to move forward. The first few days were a blur. I didn't know what to do with myself. I hadn't been alone in years, not like this. I'd gotten used to waking up next to someone, sharing my day, hearing about her work, her worries. Now there was just emptiness. I threw myself into work to keep my mind off things. I didn't want to think about Amy, didn't want to think about the mess I'd left behind. But even when I was busy, I'd find myself zoning out, wondering if she was doing okay. Was she with him? Was she thinking about me? Or had I become just another mistake in her past? The worst part was the silence when I got home. I wasn't used to coming home to an empty apartment, to nothing but my thoughts. At first it felt freeing, like I was finally escaping the prison I'd been living in. But it quickly turned into loneliness. I didn't want to reach out to anyone, didn't want to hear from her, but it still felt like a void I couldn't fill. Then came the nights. The nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. The good memories, the bad ones, the ones I wished I could forget. I wondered how things got this bad, how I had missed all the signs. And then I'd remind myself that it didn't matter anymore. I couldn't change the past. All I could do now was survive it. But surviving was harder than I thought. Every day felt like an uphill battle, and I wasn't sure I had the strength to keep climbing. I was still angry, still hurt, but I was starting to feel something else too, numbness. It was like I was going through the motions of my life, but none of it really mattered anymore. I wasn't sure where I was headed. All I knew was that I had to keep moving forward. Even if I didn't know what that looked like yet, even if I didn't know who I was anymore. The one thing I was certain of was that I couldn't go back. Not to Amy. Not to the life we had. That door had closed and it wasn't going to open again. It's strange the way time works. The first few weeks were unbearable. I thought I'd never get used to being alone. But slowly, the edges of the pain started to dull. It wasn't gone, hell, it wasn't even close, but it was bearable. I could get through the days without breaking down every other hour. Amy reached out a few times, sent a couple of texts asking how I was, if I was okay. I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to keep holding on to the past. But I also didn't want to completely close the door either. Every message from her felt like an anchor pulling me back into a relationship that was already dead. I didn't know how to let go. Part of me still wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could fix things, that we could find a way to get back to how we were before everything fell apart. But the other part of me, the part that was learning how to survive without her, knew that I couldn't go back to that. There was no going back. I spent a lot of time just sitting in my new place, looking out the window. It was a small, quiet apartment in an older building, but I found something comforting about its solitude. The walls were bare, the furniture simple. I didn't want to make it feel like home, not yet. I didn't want to invest in anything that might make it harder to leave later, or make it harder to cut ties with the life I'd once known. I started taking walks around the city. Nothing crazy, just to clear my head. I'd walk for hours, not thinking about anything, letting the rhythm of my steps drown out all the thoughts that were constantly bombarding me. Sometimes I'd pass by couples laughing, holding hands, and I'd feel this ache in my chest, like I was missing something vital. But I also felt a strange sense of relief. I didn't have to be someone's husband anymore. I didn't have to pretend to be okay when I wasn't. But letting go of her, of us, was harder than I thought. Even though I knew what she'd done, even though I knew she'd betrayed me in the worst way possible, a part of me still wanted her. Still loved her, despite everything. It felt weak, pathetic even. How could I still care after everything? How could I miss her? How could I miss her touch, her smile, the way she'd laugh at my stupid jokes? But then I'd remember what she did. And I'd remind myself that the Amy I loved was gone. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who didn't care about me the way I thought she did. The person who left all that mess behind was not the woman I had spent 25 years with. And that's when the reality would hit me. The anger. The hurt. The betrayal. I couldn't keep holding on to the past. I couldn't keep loving someone who had thrown everything we built away without a second thought. I had to keep moving forward, even if I didn't know how. The hardest part was accepting that I wasn't just losing her, I was losing myself. The person I was when we were together, the one who trusted, the one who believed in love, was gone too. I wasn't sure who I was anymore, but I knew I had to find out. The pain wouldn't last forever. I kept telling myself that. I wasn't sure when the healing would come, but I couldn't wait around for it anymore. It was time to start living again, even if I didn't know how yet. That it's weird, how life just keeps moving forward even when you feel like you're stuck in one place. I didn't know how to start moving on, but eventually, I realized that if I didn't make some sort of effort, I'd be stuck in the same cycle of anger and heartbreak forever. One day, I found myself walking down the street, aimlessly like I usually did. But this time, I didn't feel the same weight in my chest. The air felt a little fresher, the world a little less heavy. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew I had to do something. Anything. Just to break free of the suffocating silence I'd been living in. I signed up for a gym. At first, it felt like a distraction, just something to get my mind off everything. But as the weeks went by, I started feeling a little bit stronger, not just physically but mentally. The act of pushing myself, of showing up every day and taking care of myself in a way I hadn't in years, gave me something to focus on. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start. I also reconnected with a few old friends. People I hadn't seen in years because I'd been so caught up in my marriage. It was awkward at first, like trying to fit a puzzle piece back into a spot it didn't quite belong, but it felt good. It felt like a reminder that there was a world outside of my broken marriage. One evening, I went out for drinks with Mike, a friend I'd known for years but hadn't talked to much since Amy and I got married. We sat at the bar talking about the old days, the stuff we used to do when we were younger. It felt nice. Like I was starting to find a piece of myself again. For the first time in a long time, I laughed. A real, genuine laugh. The next day, Amy called again. She left a message, apologizing for everything, asking if we could talk. I didn't listen to the whole thing. I knew what she was going to say. More apologies, more explanations, more of the same thing I'd heard 100 times already. But this time, I didn't feel the urge to call her back. I didn't want to drag myself back into that mess. I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to forgive her. And honestly, I didn't know if I even wanted to try. I realized I didn't need her to tell me she was sorry. I didn't need her to fix things. I needed to fix myself. I had to rebuild piece by piece. The hardest part was accepting that I didn't know what that looked like yet, but I was willing to figure it out. For the first time in a while, I felt like I was starting to get my life back. It was a small step. But it was a step. And I was okay with that. I didn't have to have it all figured out. All I needed to do was keep moving forward. It's funny how life throws things at you when you least expect it. I had been feeling a little better, getting into a routine, focusing on myself, not thinking too much about Amy or the mess I left behind. But then, out of nowhere, she called again. I didn't want to pick up, but for some reason I did. Maybe it was the curiosity, or maybe part of me still wanted some kind of closure. Chris. Her voice sounded small, like she hadn't expected me to answer. I know you don't want to talk to me, but I need to say something. I let out a slow breath, trying to keep calm. What is it, Amy? She hesitated before speaking. I've been seeing someone. It's been a while now. I didn't want you to find out this way, but I think you deserve to know. It felt like a punch to the stomach, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I had always known deep down that she'd move on eventually, but hearing her actually say it, was like confirming that everything I had built with her was truly over. I wasn't sure how I was supposed to feel about it. Anger? Relief? Hurt? All I felt was numb. All right, I said, my voice steady even though I was shaking inside. I'm glad you're doing what you need to do, Amy. But don't call me again. I've moved on. It's time for both of us to move forward. There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear her breathing, and for a second I thought she might say something else, something to make me change my mind, to make me second-guess everything. But she didn't. I understand, she whispered, and then the line went quiet. I sat there for a while, holding the phone, staring at the screen. Part of me wanted to feel angry, to feel something, but I just didn't. I was too far gone now. I had started rebuilding my life, and hearing her with someone else didn't change that. I hung up the phone and put it down. For the first time in ages, I didn't feel like I had to react to every little thing she did. I had taken a step forward, and maybe it was a small one, but it was a step. And that was all I needed to focus on right now. That the next few days felt different. There was a strange lightness in the air around me, like I had finally exhaled after holding my breath for months. Amy's call had thrown me off, but in a way, it gave me the final closure I didn't even realize I needed. It was the last confirmation that she had moved on. And with that, I felt like I could finally stop holding on to a version of her that didn't exist anymore. I didn't feel the intense anger or hurt anymore. Instead, I felt free. Not completely healed, but free. The chains that I didn't even know I was dragging had been loosened. I didn't need to keep fighting a battle with someone who wasn't in my life anymore. And that realization hit me hard. I spent a lot of time thinking about what it meant to actually move on. It wasn't about forgetting her or pretending like she never existed in my life. It wasn't about pretending the betrayal didn't hurt. But it was about accepting that my life wasn't tied to her anymore. It was about realizing that I could still be whole, still be happy, even without her in my life. I started doing more things for myself. Things I'd put off for years because I'd been too focused on us or our life, or whatever it was that had consumed me. I took up new hobbies, things that had interested me but never seemed important enough when I was married. Photography. Writing. Hiking. Even just reading a book without feeling guilty about not spending every moment with her. I had forgotten what it felt like to do things for me. I also went out with friends more. Mike, the guy I'd reconnected with, invited me out for dinner one night, and we spent hours just talking about life, reminiscing about the past, but also looking forward to the future. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed real conversation, how much I'd been missing from my life. The emptiness I'd felt before started to fade a little more each day. One afternoon, I took a walk through the city, just enjoying the warmth of the sun on my face. It wasn't a big thing, but for some reason I felt alive in a way I hadn't in a long time. I passed by couples holding hands, families laughing, and I didn't feel bitter anymore. I didn't feel like I was missing out on something I couldn't have. I realized that maybe my story wasn't over yet. Maybe it was just beginning again. The hardest part of healing, I'd learned, wasn't about getting back to who I was before. It was about creating a new version of myself, one that didn't depend on anyone else's validation or love. It was about finding peace on my own. Amy was a part of my past now, but she didn't define my future. And for the first time in a long time, I finally felt ready to embrace that future. A couple of weeks later, I found myself in an even stranger situation than before. I was at a cafe, sitting by the window, sipping on coffee and reading a book when I noticed someone approaching my table out of the corner of my eye. My heart skipped a beat when I looked up and saw her. Amy. I froze, unsure of what to do. She looked different, haggard, like she hadn't been sleeping much. Her hair was messier than usual, and there was something about the way she stood there that made her seem vulnerable. "Chris," she said, her voice hesitant but soft. "Can I sit?" I didn't want her to. I didn't want to go back into any of that. But for some reason I nodded, motioning to the chair across from me. She sat down slowly, as if unsure of how to proceed. "I didn't think you'd ever want to see me again." I just looked at her. The woman who had torn everything apart was sitting right in front of me. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me still wanted to yell at her, to tell her everything I'd been holding inside. But the other part of me just felt tired. Tired of holding on to all the anger, tired of carrying that weight. "You don't have to say anything," I said finally, my voice low. "I've moved on, Amy. I've accepted everything." She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I know. I wanted to say sorry. For everything. For what I did to you. I know there's nothing I can do to fix it, but I need you to know that I am truly sorry. I was selfish. And I hurt you." I didn't realize how much until it was too late. I didn't know what to say. The apology felt hollow, like she was saying the words because she thought they would make everything better. But I could tell she was genuinely broken by what had happened. I could see it in the way she spoke, the way she held herself. But it didn't change the fact that it was too late. "I'm sorry, Amy," I said, my voice steady. "But I can't forgive you. Not the way you want me to. I'm still angry and I'm still hurt. And I think I'll always be. But that's not something I'm going to carry with me anymore. I have to let it go." Her face crumpled at my words, and I could see the pain in her eyes. It wasn't easy to be the one who had to face the consequences of her actions. But I couldn't carry this weight for her anymore. It was no longer my responsibility to fix her or our past. It was her burden to carry now. She sat there for a moment, not speaking. The silence between us felt heavy, but it wasn't as suffocating as it had been before. It felt like we were two people who had finally accepted what we had become, two strangers who had shared a life, but whose paths had long since diverged. "Goodbye, Amy," I said softly, standing up. "I hope you find what you're looking for." She didn't say anything else. I didn't expect her to. I turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving the past behind me for good. As I stepped out into the sunlight, I felt free. Not healed, not perfect, but free. I wasn't holding on to anything anymore. The weight of the past had been lifted, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was living for myself. I didn't know what the future held, but I was ready to face it. I wasn't going to look back anymore. I was done with the past. It was time to move forward. And for the first time in a while, I felt like I had everything I needed to do just that. The next few weeks were a blur of small changes, little things that started to add up. It wasn't a grand transformation. It wasn't like one day I woke up and everything was perfect. But there was a shift. I felt like I was finally starting to find pieces of myself that I had lost along the way. I kept seeing friends, going out more, and not just for distractions, but because I genuinely enjoyed being around people who saw me for who I was, not for who I used to be with. I even started to date again. Nothing serious, just coffee dates, casual conversations, and a few laughs. It felt nice to just talk to someone new, without all the history and baggage. I also found myself getting back into hobbies I had put off for years. I'd always enjoyed photography but had put my camera away when life got too busy. So, one weekend I grabbed it, went for a walk through the park, and just started shooting. The joy that came from capturing moments that felt real, that were just mine, was like rediscovering a part of myself I had buried. Work was also going better than I had expected. I started taking on more projects, more responsibility, and for the first time in a while, I felt like I was really putting my energy into something that mattered, my future. Then one evening, while I was sitting on my couch, flipping through a magazine, I got a text from Mike. It had been a while since we last hung out. He had been busy with his own life, and I had been figuring mine out. "Hey man, you free this weekend? Got tickets for a concert, thought you might want to join." It was spontaneous, but it felt right. I'd spent too much time thinking and overanalyzing everything. I needed to just live. So, I agreed. The concert was nothing special, but it was fun. Being around people, singing along to familiar songs, feeling the energy of the crowd, it reminded me that life could still be good, that I didn't need to carry all the weight I'd been dragging for so long. That night, as I walked home, I thought about how far I had come since that phone call with Amy. I didn't feel like I had all the answers, and I didn't expect myself to be healed or whole. But I realized that the broken pieces, the ones I thought would never fit back together, were actually shaping something new, something better. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I didn't know where life was taking me, but I knew I was headed somewhere. And that was enough. I didn't need to know the details. I didn't need to figure it all out. The only thing that mattered was that I was moving forward, step by step, no longer looking back. And that felt like the beginning of something new. As the months passed, I started to realize something I didn't expect. Life wasn't about finding some big, dramatic closure or some perfect moment of healing. It wasn't about erasing the pain or pretending the past didn't happen. It was about learning to live with it, finding peace in the quiet moments and accepting that things had changed. I had changed. There were days when I still felt that emptiness, the sharp pang of loss, but those moments weren't as frequent. They didn't define me anymore. I learned how to sit with those feelings, acknowledge them, and then let them pass. That was something I hadn't known how to do before. I used to think I needed to fix everything, control every moment. But now I knew that sometimes you just have to let things unfold on their own. One weekend I took a short trip by myself, just a few days away to clear my head. I went to the coast, rented a small cabin, and spent the days walking along the beach, listening to the waves and reflecting. It wasn't about running away from everything, it was about recharging, reconnecting with myself. I had spent so long living in the shadow of my past that I forgot what it felt like to just be. To not have to prove anything to anyone, to not carry the weight of a broken marriage or a betrayal. The trip gave me the clarity I needed. I wasn't holding on to the past anymore. I had let go of the anger and the resentment. I didn't need answers from Amy or from anyone else. I didn't need to know if she was truly happy with her new life, or if she regretted what she did. I didn't need her closure. I had mine. And that in itself was enough. When I got back home, I felt lighter. Not like a weight had been taken off my shoulders, but more like I had finally stopped carrying a bag full of rocks I thought I needed. I was content. I was finally okay with who I had become. I don't know what the future holds. I'm not looking for it to be perfect, but I'm open to whatever comes next. There's a new kind of peace I've found, a peace that comes from not having all the answers but still finding joy in the journey. So here I am, moving forward. One day at a time. And for the first time in a long time, I'm okay with that. I'm not broken anymore. I'm just me. And that's enough.
Bye.